It was exactly 2:17 in the morning when Steph Curry's phone vibrated on the nightstand, breaking the silence of the house in Atherton. The sudden glow of the screen illuminated the dark room, and Steph, still half asleep, thought about ignoring the call. After all, calls in the middle of the night rarely brought good news. But then he saw the name on the screen: Kevin Durant. Steph sat up in bed instantly, sleep disappearing like morning fog in the sun. That number he hadn't seen. That number appear on his phone in over 18 months. Not since Kevin left the Warriors so abruptly. Not since the media turned their championship partnership into a supposed rivalry. Have you ever received a call from someone you thought you'd never speak to again? Steph's heart raced as he stared at the blinking screen. "Steph, are you going to answer?" Isha murmured from the other side of the bed, awakened by the persistent vibration of the phone. Steph hesitated. There was so much history between him and Kevin. 3 years of incomparable chemistry on the court, 2 championships won together, moments of shared glory that still made his eyes shine when he watched the highlights. But there was also the silent hurt of the departure, the press statements that seemed to minimize what they built together, the awkward silences when they encountered each other at NBA events. It was impossible not to feel the weight of all these memories concentrated in that moment, in that phone vibrating insistently. "I don't know," Steph admitted, but his hand was already reaching for the device. In the last second before the call would drop, he answered. "KD?" Steph said, trying to keep his voice neutral, not too friendly, not too cold. What he heard from the other side of the line made his world stop completely. It was a sob, a muffled sob, followed by a choppy breath that Steph recognized immediately. It was the sound of someone desperately trying to control tears and failing miserably. "Steph!" Kevin's voice came broken, barely able to articulate the name. I know it's late. I know I don't have the right to call like this, but—" Another sob interrupted his words. Naturally, this leads us to a disturbing question. What could drive Kevin Durant, one of the most stoic and controlled athletes in the NBA, to call a former teammate at 2 in the morning, crying? Steph felt all his defenses, all the carefully guarded hurt, melting instantly. It didn't matter what had happened between them. The person on the other side of the line was someone he had called brother for 3 intense years. "KD, man, it's okay," Steph said, and his voice carried a softness that surprised even himself. "Take a deep breath. I'm here." "I didn't know who else to call," Kevin said between sobs. "I have a phone full of contacts, but you're the only person who will really understand." Understand what? Steph wanted to ask, but he knew he needed to let Kevin speak in his own time. "Man, talk to me," Steph said, getting out of bed and walking to the office so as not to wake the children. "What's happening?" Isha followed him with her eyes, concern evident in her expression. She knew the history between Steph and Kevin, knew how their relationship had been complicated after Durant's departure. Seeing Steph so visibly affected by that call said a lot about what was happening on the other side of the line. "I messed everything up, Steph," Kevin finally managed to say, his voice laden with a pain that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "I thought I knew what I was doing. Thought I was making the right decision for my career, for my legacy. But His voice broke again. "Can you perceive how sometimes the decisions we make seeking external validation end up leaving us emptier internally?" Kevin was clearly living this reality in a devastating way. Steph sat in his office chair, the phone pressed against his ear, listening to the muffled sounds of Kevin trying to compose himself. Outside, California slept under a starry sky, oblivious to the human drama unfolding in that phone conversation. KD, Steph said gently, it doesn't matter what happened. You can tell me. We're brothers, remember? Champions together. That doesn't change just because you're in another uniform now. Those words seemed to open an emotional floodgate in Kevin. That's exactly it, Steph, Kevin said, and there was a desperate urgency in his voice. I have another uniform, have another team, have other people around me. But man, I've never felt so alone in my life. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with unspoken truths and shared pains that only those who live under the intense spotlight of professional sports can truly understand. People hate me, Steph, Kevin continued, and now the words came in torrents, as if a dam had finally burst. It doesn't matter what I do. If I win, they say I only won because I chose the easy path. If I lose, they say I was never that good. If I speak, they say I'm too sensitive. If I stay quiet, they say I'm too arrogant. Something that touches deeply is realizing that Kevin was describing not just his own experience, but the invisible prison that many elite athletes experience, the impossibility of simply being human. Steph closed his eyes, processing each word. He knew exactly what Kevin was talking about. He himself had dealt with criticism, with impossible expectations, with the crushing weight of having to be perfect all the time. But somehow, Steph had always had a more solid support network, a more present family, an inner peace that Kevin was clearly struggling to find. I wake up every day and put on a mask, Kevin continued, his voice oscillating between anger and despair. I pretend I don't care what they say. I pretend I'm this tough guy, unshakable, focused only on the game. But inside, Steph, inside, I'm falling apart. The tears returned, and this time, Kevin didn't try to hide them. Steph felt a tightness in his chest. He remembered the moments in the Warriors' locker room when Kevin occasionally let his guard down, when they talked about more than basketball, when a genuine friendship blossomed between two of the greatest talents in the sport. Do you remember that game against the Cavaliers in 2017? Kevin suddenly asked, changing the subject with the quickness of someone trying to escape painful thoughts. When you made that no-look assist and I converted? And then you jumped on my back celebrating as if we'd won the championship? Steph smiled despite the seriousness of the moment. How could I forget? You almost knocked me down with that bear hug. That moment, Kevin said, and there was a painful nostalgia in his voice. That moment I felt I was part of something bigger than me. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was just pure joy of playing basketball with people who really cared about me. What's most impressive is how Kevin was articulating a fundamental truth about happiness. It's not about the trophies we win, but about who we win them with. I miss that, Kevin admitted, and those 5 words carried the weight of 18 months of wounded pride, of questioned decisions, of self-imposed loneliness. Steph stood up, walking to the office window. The city slept below, sparse lights blinking in the darkness. He thought about all the times he had wondered how Kevin was really feeling, all the times he almost picked up the phone to call, but didn't out of pride or uncertainty. KD, Steph said, choosing his words carefully. Why are you calling me now? What happened? There was a long pause, and Steph could hear Kevin breathing deeply, gathering courage for what he was about to say. Because, Kevin finally answered, I need someone to help me remember why I do this. Why I wake up every day and put my body through this hell. Why I endure the hate, the pressure, the impossible expectations. And then Kevin said something that made Steph's heart tighten. I need someone to convince me that it's worth continuing. Because right now, Steph, right now, I really don't know if it is. The silence that followed was deafening. Steph gripped the phone tighter, processing the magnitude of what Kevin was saying, and it was in that moment that he realized this wasn't just a call from an old friend seeking comfort. It was a cry for help from someone on the edge of an emotional precipice. And what Steph would respond in the next moments could change not just the friendship between them, but possibly the future of one of the greatest talents basketball has ever seen. Steph took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that moment. Every word he said now would matter, not just to comfort a friend, but potentially to save someone from a destructive spiral. KD, Steph said with deliberate calm. First, I want you to know that I'm here, completely present. I'm not going anywhere. On the other side of the line, Kevin sobbed again. But this time there was a palpable relief in the sound, as if just hearing those words had already relieved part of the weight he carried. Second, Steph continued, I want you to breathe with me. Seriously. 3 deep breaths. Let's do it together. It was a technique that Steph had learned over the years to deal with the pressure of decisive moments. He could hear Kevin on the other side trying to follow. The breathing still, choppy, but gradually stabilizing. Now, Steph said softly, tell me what's really happening. Not the version you show the world. The real truth. There was a long silence while Kevin gathered courage. I don't know exactly when it started, Kevin finally said, his voice calmer but laden with exhaustion. Maybe it was always there, but it got worse after I left Golden State. This feeling of emptiness, that no matter what I do, it will never be enough. Naturally, this leads us to a deep reflection. How many people at the height of success face this same devastating feeling of inadequacy? Do you know what it's like to wake up every day being Kevin Durant? Kevin asked, and there was a bitterness in his voice that Steph had never heard before. Everyone has an opinion about you, about your choices, about your value as a person based on how many rings you have. Steph sat down again, knowing he needed to let Kevin vent completely. I spent years being called second best, Kevin continued, always in LeBron's shadow. Then I finally come to Golden State, help win 2 championships, and you know what they say? That it doesn't count. That I took the easy path. That the rings aren't real. The pain in his voice was palpable. Years of frustration finally finding an outlet. So I leave, Kevin said, thinking that if I win somewhere else, they'll finally respect me. They'll finally stop questioning whether I'm really great. It was impossible not to notice how Kevin was describing an impossible quest, trying to win the respect of people who had already decided never to grant it to him. But it doesn't matter, Steph. It doesn't matter what I do. People have already decided who I am. And I became that person for them. The villain, the snake, the guy who will always make the wrong choice. Steph closed his eyes, feeling Kevin's pain as if it were his own. He remembered all the times he saw Kevin scrolling through Twitter after games, reading every cruel comment, every analysis that questioned his character. And the worst of all, Kevin said, his voice breaking again, is that I started to believe them. I started to think that maybe they're right. That maybe I really don't deserve the respect I seek. Something that touches deeply is realizing how the external narrative can become our internal narrative when we don't have authentic voices to remind us of our truth. Kevin, Steph interrupted gently, are you telling me that the opinion of strangers on the internet weighs more than the reality of what you've accomplished? It's not just the internet, Steph, Kevin replied. It's the analysts. It's the former players. It's people I admired as a kid saying my accomplishments are worthless. How do you deal with that? How do you maintain sanity when the whole world seems determined to diminish everything you do? You can perceive how Kevin was articulating a painful truth about public life. The impossibility of controlling the YouTube narrative that others create about you? And the loneliness, man, Kevin continued, and now the words came in torrents, as if he was finally allowing himself to be completely honest for the first time in years. I'm surrounded by people all the time, but I feel completely alone. Teammates who are colleagues, but not brothers. People around me who want something from me, but don't really know me. Steph thought about the years they played together, the conversations in the locker room, the laughter during team flights, the silent moments of mutual understanding that only elite athletes share. I have everything, Steph, Kevin said, and there was a bitter irony in his voice. Money I'll never be able to spend. Fame that follows me wherever I go. Professional respect from coaches and some players. But you know what I don't have? A place where I can just be Kevin. Not KD, the brand. Not the player with something to prove. Just me. What's most impressive is how Kevin was describing the unique loneliness of being constantly public, never being able to really turn off, never being able to be just a regular person. I wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety attacks, Kevin confessed, and Steph could hear the shame in his voice for admitting this vulnerability. My heart races. I can't breathe. I keep thinking about all the comments, all the criticism, all the ways I've failed. KD, are you having panic attacks? Steph asked, concern evident in his voice. For months, Kevin admitted. Sometimes before important games, sometimes out of nowhere. And I can't tell anyone because, let's be honest, how would it look if Kevin Durant admitted he's afraid, that he's anxious, that sometimes he doesn't even want to get out of bed? This admission left Steph momentarily speechless. He was witnessing the complete breakdown of the armor that Kevin had built over years, the persona of the unshakable warrior, the fierce competitor who never showed weakness. And you know what the most fucked up part of all this is? Kevin asked, laughing bitterly. I still play well, still score 30 points a night, still win games, because I learned to play on autopilot. My body knows what to do even when my mind is screaming to stop. Naturally, this leads us to a disturbing truth about excellence under pressure. Sometimes we become so good at performing that no one notices when we're dying inside. Kevin, Steph said carefully, are you talking to anyone? A therapist? Sports psychologist? I tried, Kevin admitted. Went to two. But man, how are they going to understand? They don't live this. They don't know what it's like to have millions of people having opinions about every move you make. They give generic advice about not caring what others think, as if it were that simple. Is that why you called me? Steph asked. Because I understand? You're the only person who's seen both sides of me, Steph, Kevin replied. You saw me when I was at the top. Champion, respected, happy. And you know what it was like before and what it's like after. You understand that winning doesn't solve everything, that sometimes the weight of victory is as heavy as defeat. Steph stood up again, walking around the office while processing everything he was hearing. He thought about how Kevin always seemed a bit out of place, always searching for something he could never completely name. I think about quitting, Steph, Kevin said suddenly, and those words hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Not just basketball, everything. Trying to be this person everyone expects me to be, carrying this weight every day. Kevin, Steph said firmly, when you say quit everything, what exactly do you mean? There was a long pause, and Steph felt his heart racing, waiting for an answer he feared to hear. I don't know, Kevin finally admitted. It's just that sometimes I think about what it would be like to simply disappear. Go somewhere where nobody knows Kevin Durant, where I can just be a regular guy, without expectations, without judgments, without this constant pressure. The relief Steph felt hearing this explanation was immense, but the concern remained. But then I remember, Kevin continued, that there's no place in the world where I can escape from myself. And that's the scariest part. I'm trapped being Kevin Durant, and I don't know anymore who that person really is. It was impossible not to notice how Kevin was. Struggling with a deep identity crisis, the person he was had become so intertwined with the player that he didn't know where one ended and the other began. That's why I called you, Kevin said, his voice becoming small, almost childlike. Because you knew me when I still laughed easily, when basketball was just a game I loved, not a life sentence. Do you remember that, Kevin? Steph felt tears forming in his own eyes. I remember, KD, he said softly. And you know what? That Kevin is still there, just hidden under layers of pain and impossible expectations. And it was in that moment that Steph knew exactly what he needed to say to start bringing his friend back from the precipice. Steph walked to the office window, looking at the stars dotting the California sky. He had two choices in that moment. He could offer empty words of comfort, motivational cliches that wouldn't touch the core of the problem, or he could do something riskier, be as vulnerable as Kevin was being. He chose the second option. Kevin, Steph began, his voice carrying a weight he rarely showed, I'm going to tell you something I've never said publicly, something even Isha doesn't completely know. On the other side of the line, Kevin fell silent, realizing that Steph was about to open a door that rarely opened. In the 2016 season, before you came to the Warriors, I had a moment where I almost quit too, Steph said, and he could feel Kevin holding his breath. Have you ever witnessed that rare moment when someone completely removes their social mask? Steph was doing exactly that, and the power of that act of vulnerability was palpable even through the phone line. We had just lost in the finals, Steph continued. 73 wins in the regular season, and everything fell apart. And you know what was worse? It wasn't the criticism about my game. It was realizing that, even having the best regular season in history, it still wasn't enough. Steph, I didn't know, Kevin began, but Steph continued. I spent weeks locked at home, avoiding social media, avoiding even watching basketball. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that ball bouncing out in Game 7. I saw LeBron with that block on Iggy. I saw the defeat in every torturous detail. It was impossible not to notice how Steph was sharing a vulnerability that showed Kevin he wasn't alone in that kind of psychological torment. And you know what the darkest moment was? Steph asked. It was when I realized I didn't know anymore why I was playing basketball. Was it for love of the game? For competition? Or just to prove something to people who will never be satisfied, no matter how many rings I win? What pulled you out of that hole? Kevin asked, and there was an urgency in the question, as if the answer could be the key he was looking for. My daughter Riley, Steph replied. She was 4 years old at the time. She didn't know anything about MVP, about records, about what people were saying on social media. To her, I was just Daddy. And one day she asked me, Daddy, Why don't you play with your balls in the backyard anymore? Steph paused, letting the words settle. It was in that moment that I realized something fundamental, Kevin. I had let the love of the game be hijacked by the need for external validation. I had forgotten that basketball was, at bottom, just a game. Something I chose to do because I loved it, not because I had to prove something to someone. Naturally, this leads us to a powerful reflection. How many of us lose the joy in the things we love because we transform them into vehicles for external validation? But Steph, Kevin said, you recovered that. Won more championships. Proved your worth. I'm still stuck in that cycle of seeking something I can't reach. No, Kevin, Steph said firmly. You're getting it wrong. I didn't recover anything by proving my worth. I recovered when I stopped trying to prove my worth. The silence that followed was profound, Kevin processing those words. What do you mean? Kevin finally asked. I'm going to ask you a question, Steph said, and I want you to be completely honest. When was the last time you played basketball just because you loved the game? Without thinking about statistics, without thinking about what people will say, without thinking about legacy? Just played? Kevin was silent for a long moment. I don't remember, he finally admitted, and there was a deep sadness in that confession. Exactly, Steph said. And you know when I used to play like that? In practice with you, Clay and Draymond. When we'd have those pickup games that turned into ridiculous competitions about who could make the most impossible shot. When you tried to posterize me during practice, and we'd laugh about it afterward. Something that touches deeply is realizing how Kevin had lost the joy of the game in the pursuit of validation. And Steph was gently reminding him of when that joy still existed. Those were the best moments of my career, Steph, Kevin said, and his voice carried a painful nostalgia. Because in those moments, Steph explained, you weren't Kevin Durant, the second best player in the world trying to prove he's first. You were just KD, a ridiculously talented guy who loved the game and had brothers who challenged and supported you at the same time. I miss that every day, Kevin admitted. I know you do, Steph said. And I'm going to tell you something that might hurt to hear, but that you need to understand. You're not going to find that again while you're seeking validation from people who have already decided not to give it to you. What's most impressive is how Steph was being brutally honest in a way that only a true friend could be. KD, you're one of the 5 best players who have ever touched a basketball, Steph continued. You have skills that defy the laws of physics. You've changed the game in ways people are still trying to understand. But none of that matters if you can't find peace in who you are. How do I find that peace? Kevin asked, and there was genuine desperation in the question. First, you stop giving power to people who don't deserve to have power over you, Steph said. Every comment you read, every tweet that hurts you, every criticism that keeps you awake at night, you're giving those people the power to define who you are. But how do I just stop caring? Kevin asked. You don't stop caring, Steph replied. You redirect where you put your emotional energy. Instead of seeking validation from strangers, you find it in people who really know and love you. Instead of trying to prove your worth through achievements, you remember that your worth is inherent. It exists because you exist. You can perceive how Steph was offering not just comfort, but a real path to healing and transformation. Steph, that sounds beautiful, but I don't know if I can do that, Kevin said. I'm not saying it's easy, Steph admitted, but I'll tell you what changed everything for me. I started asking, who do I want to be? Instead of, What do I want to achieve? And the answer changed everything. Who do you want to be? Kevin asked. I want to be a man my children are proud to call father, a husband who honors his wife, a friend who's present when needed, even at 2 in the morning when someone I care about is suffering, Steph said. And these last words carried a clear meaning for Kevin. I want to be someone who, when looking in the mirror, recognizes and respects the person they see reflected. Everything else, the championships, the records, the recognition, is just bonus. True champions understand that external victories are empty without inner peace. And Steph was articulating this truth with a clarity that penetrated Kevin's defenses. But what about legacy? Kevin asked. What about being remembered as one of the greats? Kevin, you want to know the truth about legacy? Steph said. The only legacy that really matters is how you make people feel. When people remember Kevin Durant 50 years from now, they're not going to remember how many points you scored. They're going to remember if you inspired them, if you were authentic, if you showed that it's possible to be great and still be human. I don't know if I can be that person, Kevin said. But there was something different in his voice now. It wasn't just despair anymore, but also a tentative curiosity. You already are that person, KD, Steph said. You just forgot. The Kevin who called me at 2 in the morning crying, showing real vulnerability. That's the Kevin people will remember fondly. Not the guy who scores 30 points a night, but the man who had the courage to admit he's struggling. And then Steph said something that would completely change the course of the conversation. Kevin, I'm going to make you a proposal. Not about basketball, not about teams or contracts, about rebuilding who you really are. What kind of proposal? Kevin asked, and for the first time in the conversation, there was a note of hope in his voice. Come spend a few days here at home, Steph said. No agenda, no pressure. Just two guys who were brothers, remembering what that means. Maybe we play some pickup ball without cameras. Maybe we just talk. Maybe you discover who Kevin Durant could be, when he's not trying to be what everyone expects. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was no longer laden with pain, but with possibility. You'd do that? Kevin asked, and there was incredulity in his voice. After everything, after how things ended. KD, Steph said, you called me in your darkest moment, even though it was 2 in the morning, even with all the complicated history between us. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. And that person I want to help find himself again. And it was in that moment that Kevin Durant began to cry again. But this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. Tears of someone who had carried an impossible weight alone for so long and finally found someone willing to help carry it. I don't know what to say, Kevin managed to articulate between sobs, but now his voice carried something that wasn't there at the beginning of the call. Hope. You don't need to say anything now, Steph replied softly. You just need to promise you'll come. No expectations, no agenda, just two brothers reconnecting. When? Kevin asked, and the urgency in the question revealed how desperate he was for this genuine connection. Tomorrow if you want, Steph said, or when you feel ready. The door is always open. There was a moment of silence while Kevin processed the magnitude of what was happening. After months, maybe years, of feeling completely isolated, he had just found a lifeline in the most unlikely form. The friend he thought he had lost. Steph, Kevin said, his voice still trembling but stronger. Thank you. Not just for answering the call, but for for reminding me of who I used to be, of who I can still be. You can perceive how sometimes we need someone from outside to show us the parts of ourselves we forgot existed. Steph was doing exactly that for Kevin. "Kevin," Steph said, "you called me in my darkest moment too, remember? That Game 6 of the finals in 2019, when I got injured? You were one of the first people to call. You told me I was more than a basketball player, that my value wasn't on the courts, but in the kind of person I was." "I remember," Kevin said softly. "Those words helped me more than you imagine," Steph continued. "And now it's my turn to remind you of that. You're more than your points per game, more than your championships, more than any narrative they've created about you." It was impossible not to notice how the conversation had come full circle. Two elite athletes who supported each other in the most vulnerable moments of their careers. "I'm going to accept your invitation," Kevin said with determination. "But Steph, what if I get there and don't know how to just be Kevin? What if I'm so broken that not even friendship can fix me?" "First," Steph said, "you're not broken. You're wounded. There's a huge difference. Broken can't be fixed, but wounded can heal." "And second?" Kevin asked. "Second, you don't need to know how to just be Kevin. We're going to figure that out together. One day at a time, one moment at a time." What's most impressive is how Steph was offering not a quick fix, but a commitment to the healing process, something much more valuable and rare. The conversation continued for another 2 hours. They talked about memories, the good times with the Warriors, the laughter in the locker room, the epic games they made together. They talked about regrets, unspoken words, misunderstandings that grew in the absence of communication. And, most importantly, they talked about the future, not in terms of basketball or contracts, but in terms of who they wanted to be as people. When they finally hung up, it was already dawn in Oakland. Steph walked back to the bedroom where Isha was awake, waiting. "Is he okay?" she asked with concern. "He will be," Steph replied, lying down beside her. "He just needed to remember he's not alone." 3 days later, Kevin Durant was sitting in the Currys' living room, playing video games with Riley and Ryan while Steph prepared dinner. It was a simple domestic scene, almost mundane, but for Kevin, it was revolutionary. "Uncle Kevin, are you letting me win, or am I really good at this?" Riley asked with that brutal honesty of children. Kevin laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even himself. "You're really good, but don't tell anyone you beat me. My reputation is already shaken enough." Something that touches deeply is realizing how Kevin was discovering joy in simple moments that had nothing to do with basketball or fame. That night, after the children went to sleep, Steph and Kevin went out to the backyard. The night was clear, stars dotting the California sky. "You know what's funny?" Kevin said, looking up. "I have a house 3 times bigger than this. I have all the things money can buy. But in the last 3 days here, I've felt more at home than anywhere in the last 2 years." "It's because here, you can just be Kevin," Steph replied. "You don't need to be great. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to carry the weight of impossible expectations." "I don't want to lose this again," Kevin admitted. "This feeling of belonging." Naturally, this leads us to a powerful reflection. Belonging doesn't come from achievements or status, but from authentic connections where we can be completely ourselves. In the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Kevin not only stayed in regular contact with Steph, but began to make real changes in his life. He drastically limited his use of social media. He started therapy with a psychologist specializing in elite athletes. Not the type who offers cliches, but someone recommended by Steph who really understood their unique pressure. More importantly, he began to play basketball differently. Not technically, his skills remained supernatural, but emotionally. There was a lightness in his movements that analysts noticed but couldn't explain. He smiled more on the court. He interacted more with teammates. He seemed happy. Tyler Brooks, a young sports journalist, wrote an article titled "The Resurrection of KD: How Kevin Durant Rediscovered His Love for the Game." In the article, he speculated about what had changed. "Durant seems like a man who freed himself from some invisible prison," Brooks wrote. "He plays with a joy we hadn't seen in years. Something changed, and whatever it is, it's working." What Tyler Brooks didn't know was that the change had begun with a call at 2 in the morning and a friend's decision to be present in another's darkest moment. 6 months after that call, Kevin and Steph met at an all-star game. Before the game, backstage, they had a private moment. "Steph," Kevin said, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" Steph asked, knowing but wanting to hear. "For saving me," Kevin replied simply. "I didn't save you, KD," Steph said, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. "You saved yourself. You just needed someone to remind you that you were worth saving." True friends don't save each other. They hold the flashlight while we find our own way back from the darkness. The game that night was special. Not because of the statistics or the highlights, although both had played exceptionally well, but because of a simple moment in the third quarter. Kevin made an assist pass to Steph, who dunked it. As they ran back to defense, Steph put his arm over Kevin's shoulders, and both smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the fans, but for each other. That 3-second moment, captured by all the cameras but understood by few, contained a complete story of breaking, healing, and renewal. It was visual proof that true friendships can survive any storm, that vulnerability is strength, and that sometimes the most important conversations in life happen at 2 in the morning when we're desperate enough to ask for help. In the post-game interview, a reporter asked Steph about his connection with Kevin on the court. "It's like riding a bike," Steph said with a smile. "You never forget how to play with someone you really know, someone you call brother." Kevin, listening from afar, felt tears forming once more. But like that night months ago, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude. Gratitude for having found courage to make that call. Gratitude for having a friend who answered without hesitation. Gratitude for discovering that, sometimes, breaking completely is the first step to rebuilding yourself stronger. And perhaps the most powerful lesson of all is this: in a world that constantly tells us to be strong, to not show weakness, to always keep the mask on, sometimes the most courageous act is admitting we're struggling. Because when we have the courage to be vulnerable with the right people, we don't find judgment. We find love, understanding, and the reminder that no external victory is worth it if we're dying inside. Kevin Durant called Steph Curry in tears that night because he was on the edge of the precipice. And Steph, with compassion and honesty, not only pulled him back, he showed a completely new path. A path where success is measured not by achievements, but by inner peace. Where greatness isn't about being better than others, but about being authentic with yourself. Where true victories happen not on the courts, but in the silent moments when we choose connection over isolation, vulnerability over pride, and friendship over ego. And sometimes, all of this begins with a call at 2 in the morning and someone brave enough to answer.